Alrighty folks, let's start with this base, and as you can see this is a pretty large base, so when you're printing on printers like I am, you're gonna have gaps, and those gaps are gonna create seams, and we're gonna have to fill them. And I ran out of ammo mud at the time, so I actually pulled out my Vallejo mud, and what I'm doing here is I'm just filling in these seams after I've already filled them with super glue just to make a strong bond and bring the base together. I'm actually going over those seams with some dirt and mud because this scene already has plenty of dirt and mud and rocks, so it actually makes it seamless. In other words, we're covering up those seams with the mud, and this is an acrylic mud, so you just kind of stipple it on there with a big thick brush and it'll hide the seams. You'll see. Now when we have a nice smooth seam like on this cape, it's a little bit differently. We can't put mud on here and cover this seam up, so I have a different tool. We're actually going to use this little Dremel tool that I have, and I'm putting a little sanding tool on the end, just a rotary sander, and what I'm doing is I'm sanding over the super glue seam that I've made. Now this is a very rough sanding tool, so you want to go back over it with some finer sanding paper, or like I like to use sanding sponges because I get a smoother finish. And what that does is it just gives you a nice smooth transition there. Now you might not be happy with that after it's all said and done, so there's some other options and I'm going to show you here. I just took some clear resin and I'm just brushing it over top of the sanded area, and it's UV cured resin, so all you need is a UV source. So if you don't have one, you can just take it outside during the sunlight, like take it outside during the day, put it in sunlight, or get yourself an $11 UV flashlight on Amazon like I have here, and you can just cure it in place. And all that does is kind of fill in some of the rough scratches or any kind of divots you might have made when you were sanding, and then just go back over it with that same sanding sponge to blend it all together. And what you end up with is a nice finished smooth transition surface where your paint is gonna look nice and smooth, and it's gonna make it look like one whole piece. And this is what that base looks like once it's all painted up, or I should say primed up in this case, in black and fitted together. So the first thing I want to do is use this umber brown to add some variation to the base, because we do have some stone colors and whatnot in here, but we also have some dirt colors, and I kind of wanted to add like a gray and brown feel to it so it's a little bit more natural looking. What's also interesting about this base is it's kind of like a miniature, like it's got the castle Grayskull, and there's even a miniature I'm going to paint here in a little bit, but it's a very like small scale. It goes from like big scale to small scale, and then we have our giant Skeletor on it. This is actually like one of the most unique pieces I've ever painted. So after we paint that brown, we're going to go back through with this Dunkelgrau, which by the way is just German for dark gray. It's just one of my favorite colors for painting a base coat on anything that I want to be gray, like Castle Grayskull here. So we're also going to paint like the stairs that are coming down from the castle as well in this gray, and it just gives us a nice base coat. I also use that dark gray for like blacks as well sometime, because maybe you don't want something to be completely black. But anyway, after that I use this basalt gray ammo dry brush paint to paint up the base, and this is a nice like dark gray blue color that I'm using all over the place. And when we first put it down, it might seem a little bright, especially on the background of the black and the browns, but what it does is it makes a really nice dark blue gray dry brush coat, which is going to be perfect for adding shades and stuff on, and it just really brings out all those details of our base. Like, dry brushing is one of the simplest, most basic tips and tricks and techniques that I can recommend, especially to newer folks, to really bring out the details. Now, some folks will say, well, dry brushing is too easy and it's not really a great technique. Well, I would say, well, you're wrong, because it's a good technique if it works and it makes a nice product. So don't let anyone say you shouldn't use dry brushing because it's too easy. That's like saying you shouldn't use a paintbrush or an airbrush because it's too easy. You should use your hands or chopsticks to paint. I mean, it's just silly. Use what techniques work, use techniques that you're comfortable with, and just go for it, because look how beautiful this looks with one coat, and you can see all them details. Now all I'm doing is I'm picking the lighter gray color, so just a slightly lighter gray, and I'm going over the gray areas, the stones, the stairs, and then I'll put some on Castle Grayskull. I want to take a moment to say thank you to my patrons that support my work. If you're interested in some exclusive content, including daily vlogs and how-to videos, so you can get better at this hobby, or perhaps you are ready to take the next step and turn your hobby and passion into a side gig and earn some extra cash, head on over to my Patreon where you can get exclusive access to extra content. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're going to be able to shade this base now because we have all these dry brushed areas down, and it's great because, I mean, we kind of have a flat dry brush which is bringing out all the details, but we want to add a little bit of contrast, and these shades from Citadel, or really any transparent paint from, let's say, Vallejo or Army Speed Painter, will work as well. So don't think you have to use Citadel. You can use whichever one you like, you're more comfortable with. But in this case, what we're using is Drakenhof Nightshade, which is just a dark blue. That's all it is. It's a dark blue shader, and the shade series of Citadel, just like this Seraphim Sepia I'm about to use, which is a brown shade, the shaders are just less pigmented. In other words, they have more medium and less pigment than your contrast paints. So I'm no paint expert, so if I ever say something incorrect in any of my videos about how paint works or like how pigment medium works, I'm not a paint expert. I'm an engineer. So paint's not my specialty. What I do know is what looks good, and I understand enough to know that, you know, the shaders have less pigment because they don't change the color as much. Now, I painted the little sconces, that's what they're called, or torches, this bronze color, and then I painted the flame part with this fluorescent green, and it's a mixture of some pro acryls, and I also had some of this Green Stuff World ink. I love this ink because it is a fluorescent ink, and if you've ever used fluorescent paints before, they're very, very thin. Again, not a lot of pigment to them, but the effect is amazing. And then what I'm doing is I'm going over with my airbrush here in white, and yes, I know I'm spraying over the fluorescence with white, but don't worry about that. What I'm doing is I'm creating a zone of white around the sconces or the torches here, and that's going to act like an area to catch the fluorescent lights. Whenever I do object source lighting, I always spray white over the area first, especially in areas like this here where it's very dark in the background, and like you see I'm painting the door here, I'm just painting it white because I'm going to spray fluorescent paint over top of it, but in order to do that I need to have something to catch it. And as you can see here on this large one, you can see how the area underneath the sconce now is being turned green. Now if I had just painted green over top of the colors that were there, we would have lost a lot of the OSL because of the shadows and dark colors where the fluorescent paint wouldn't have shown, because it's just not very, very pigmented. But that's why I did use the ink. Now this is where it really looks cool, is when I turn the lights off in the studio and shine a UV light over top of the fluorescence, it looks really pretty. To finish this base off, we do have to add in this spirit thingy that's around there, which is just printed in clear green. So I mixed some clear green and clear resin, and I printed this in like 5 pieces, and it's put together. I tried to do the seams as best I can, but FYI, seams on clear is almost near impossible to get perfect because of hollowing and whatnot. But what I did was I went over it with some gloss coat to kind of make it look shiny and clear. But before I did that, I went over it with a green from Citadel. I want to say it was Corandris green or something like that. I don't remember the exact shade of green, but I did shade it with green Citadel contrast paint, and then I gloss coated it, and I thought it turned out really, really nice, and it kind of brought it all together. The base is really cool. Again, this is my first ZEZ Studios model I've ever made, and it was quite an adventure, and I really enjoyed it because, like I said, the base was very unique. Skeletor is really cool, the way they detailed him, and I got to paint my first miniature ever, because they have a mini He-Man with the Battle Tiger. Forgive me, I'm not a Masters of the Universe expert by any means, so if I say something wrong again, please don't chew me out in the comments. I'm an engineer that paints art. I like this, but I'm not a comic book expert or a TV show expert, so please don't chew me out if I say something wrong, okay? I'm just trying to show you guys how to paint. So anyway, I painted this model using what I understand to be like the slap chop method. So essentially you dry brush the entire miniature to bring out the details, and then you use contrast paints, which this is like a speed painting technique. I didn't choose it for that, I just really like the look of it, and it is a miniature, so, and my first mini, I'm not exaggerating. So I used a green from Citadel over top of the Battle Tiger, using reference photos online, of course. And then I have this nice red color to go over top of the red armor that the Tiger wears. So you can see it's a simple process, and I really liked it. I actually enjoyed it. Now, does that mean I'm taking up miniature painting? Probably not. But it still looks cool. Like it definitely feels different because it's all brush painting and there's no airbrush involved, at least not for what I was doing. So it was a totally different process for me, but it also broke it up. And like I said, I really enjoyed this one. So you can see what I'm just doing is, I think this is called snakebite leather, and I'm going over all like the leather bits on He-Man. So you can see how it's just a lot of different little contrast colors that I'm painting on over top of that initial contrast that I created with the dry brushing, which is the white over the black. Okay, now I didn't really care for the skin tones. I think I tried using a skin tone just over top of that initial dry brush, and I didn't like it. So what I did was I took some basic skin from Atom, which is Ammo's Atom line, by the way, like my favorite airbrush line, and it does also work pretty good for painting as well. And as you can see, I found a support. You know, raise your hand if you found a support after you started painting. I hope all of you raised your hands, because anyone who didn't, you're lying. I know you've missed supports when you're cleaning. So I put the basic skin paint down over his skin because I didn't like the way it was covering, and then I used this Reikland Flesh Shade, which again is less pigmented, but I already had a flesh tone down over all of his skin, and I wanted it to kind of shade in the recesses around his muscles and whatnot to bring out the skin color, and it did. I was actually really happy with that. Again, like, this is all new techniques for me because these techniques do not work on large scale. Like, you cannot paint a miniature, a full-size scale model this way. It'll look really, really bad, especially with Citadels or any speed paints for that matter, because you'll get so much staining, which I do have a solution for that, but that's going to come up in a future video. So you definitely want to subscribe if you haven't already to learn more of other techniques that I've developed long since painting this model. So anyway, I have some metallics for his shield and his sword. Again, these are probably just Ammo Atom metallics. So the Atom line comes from Ammo. So you always hear me kind of like fumble on that because it's 2 words. So anyway, I used some orange to create the orange stripes on the Tiger. So I thought that was a cool little detail that probably no one will see except you guys because it's such a small little detail. But I did want to add in the stripes. So anyway, taking a look at this miniature after it's all done, I was really happy with the results. Again, it's a miniature, and I've never painted one before, so to me, this was its own little journey within this this sculpture. So definitely something cool. Now, that actually completes the base. So we'll see how that all comes together later, because he's like riding up those stairs that we painted earlier. So I wanted to move on to Skeletor, and he has some really cool details on his legs and stuff, and I wanted to bring them out with dry brushing before I painted. And you might think, well, this is a waste because we're going to paint acrylics over top of it and you won't see the details, but that's actually not true. If we keep our acrylic layers thin enough, we'll actually see all those details come out. So you can just see I'm just using like a light gray and going over top of all those details, and then I'm using this bluish gray Atom paint to paint his skin tones. So I picked a bluish gray because, you know, the reference photos show him pretty gray, but if you look at like the animated series or like any kind of, well, animations of Skeletor, he is like blue and purple. I was like, well, I don't really want to make him completely blue. Like, he wasn't like blue, but like a blue-gray. I didn't want him to be too blue though. So I that's why I chose the blue-gray. And you can see how that blue-gray, as I'm painting it over top of the dry brush, it's still bringing out some of those details, like the veins in his leg and stuff like that. and the recesses around his muscles. Same thing around his hands. So again, if you keep your acrylics thin enough, that initial dry brush is still going to show through. Now what I'm doing is using a dark gray, which is actually lighter than the bluish gray, because blue is actually closer to black in terms of the color scale when we look at it. So I'm using dark gray to actually do highlights. So like around his abs and his pecs, his muscles, basically anything that's like standing out, right? The opposite of the recessed parts. The parts that are standing out is what we're going to paint with the dark gray, because it creates a nice highlight effect. And I really think this technique works well. Now you can choose to do your highlights last, and I do that a lot, especially when I do skin tones. But I actually want to do the highlights first in this case, because then I wanted to use this Drakenhof Nightshade shader last. So if I'm using contrast paints to create shades, like shadows, I usually do the shadows last. And you can see what I'm doing is this Drakenhof Nightshade, just like the base, it's a dark blue shader, like a blue-gray, and I'm putting it into the recessed areas around his muscles, around his arms, just anywhere where there's a recessed area. And what that's doing is it's creating contrast between our base coat and our highlights. And it just makes it feel bigger than it really is. Because remember, we're painting a miniature model. So light is going to hit a miniature different than if Skeletor was standing right in front of you. So the idea is to create a little bit of excessive contrast, if you will, because it makes it feel like it's full size, like real life. And if you don't believe me, look at someone standing just anywhere in half decent lighting, and you'll see contrast on them, you know, depending on what color clothing they're wearing and whatnot. You'll see all the shades. That's what we're creating, but at a small scale. Now, moving on to metallics. So I actually made a bit of a mistake here, and I painted all this metallic black, and then I realized later that there were certain parts that actually are supposed to be bronze, like that chest piece there. So forgive me for a moment while I show you that I painted all this stuff metallic black. Which, by the way, if you're ever going to paint metallics, I cannot stress enough how much I love these Atom metallic paints, both for brush and airbrush. And those new Ionics are coming out, which they weren't even a thing when I recorded this, by the way, so don't freak out and say, like, well, why aren't you using Ionics? I recorded this like 2 months ago. This is way, way old. But now, these Atom paints, they brush paint really well. Not as good as the new Ionics that I did a review on a little bit ago. I'll make sure there's a link in the description for you on that. But these spray beautifully. They spray like lacquers, and I'm not exaggerating that. These things spray so beautifully. I absolutely love them. And I did do a review on Atom when they first came out. And since then, Ammo has created so many more colors. But anyway, I digress. I painted this entire thing in metallic black, and then I sprayed it over silver over the parts that I wanted to paint purple. Now, the reason I did this is because I wanted to create some contrast between the silver parts and the purple parts. So that's why I painted some parts metallic black, and then I highlighted other areas in silver. And I didn't worry about masking, because if I overspray a little silver on the metallic black, you're not really going to see it, especially once I spray it in purple. And then again, I still had to come back and clean up a few areas, and you're going to see what I'm going to do to make it look like it's all beautiful metallics. But essentially, I just took my time with my airbrush at a 0.2mm needle and nozzle, which makes it control so much easier. And I'm just using this Luxian purple from Citadel, which is an amazingly good purple color. Absolutely love it. And then to make it feel heavy metal and make it look like metal, I'm using my favorite Dio dry brush paint. This is what got me into dry brushing, actually. Not making stones and stuff, but making cool metallics. Is this light metal from Ammo and my dry brush. And all I'm doing is I'm going over all the areas, even the purple, even the black metallic, and I'm just giving it this nice silver worn edge, and it's such a beautiful look. I absolutely love it. It works so great with the metallic black as a base. It really makes it feel like a nice worn metal. It's just a beautiful contrast in person and in video. I mean, it's one of my favorite techniques there is with the light metal. And then going over the purple really looks good. And then what I actually did was I took some bronze from the Pro Acryl range, and I dry brushed the bronze over certain areas. So dry brushing metallics is just one of those like French kiss techniques. Seriously, it's amazing. Dry brushing metallics is one of my favorite things to do. So again, I went back over certain areas with the bronze metallics based on the reference photos. And I wasn't sure about this at first, which is why I did everything in silver first. I was going to just do like a two-tone purple and gray and silver, but I actually did the bronze just to try it out, and I loved it. And I was like, wow, this really does add a lot to the model. And my Patreon said the same thing. They all agreed, yes, bronze really added a lot to it, so that's why we did that. Now what you see I'm doing here is I'm dry brushing a little bit of dark gray over top of the black fabric bits. And again, it's just bringing out some of them details and textures like the folds. Such a simple technique, adds a lot. And then we have these little belt buckles that I'm painting, and you can see also the belts, I painted those black again to make sure I didn't get any kind of dry brush on them that I remember. And then the buckles are just a silver or like a gunmetal. They're probably just silver in this case. And then what I'm doing is I had to go back over and basically cover up some of the overspray on black. I'd rather go back and paint black over something than mask, because I just hate masking and I risk damaging like my paint that I want, like the paint coverage I want to get. So I only mask in situations like what you're seeing here where there's just no other option I can do. So I'm just painting everything purple that needs to be purple after painting certain things black that needed to be black. And then after that I took the masking off and I'm just painting the bronze stuff bronze. And this, again, this is the Pro Acryl bronze color. I'm pretty sure that's what color it is. And for those of you that watched my review video of Ionic and think that I hate Pro Acryls, I don't. I don't know why so many people took it away from that. But either way, I do use Pro Acryls. I do like them. I like a lot of different paints. I have so many different brands that I use all the time. And what you're seeing here, it's just me filling in those little buttons and stuff with the silvers and the bronzes. Now here I'm still using that same bronze color, which by the way, the Pro Acryl bronze is, and there it is in the background, one of my favorite bronze colors, if not my favorite. I absolutely do love that color. I wish Ammo would come up with a better bronze color, but the Pro Acryl bronze is beautiful. Now this little gem in his chest, you can see I painted it silver first, and I've actually come up with a new technique, but it works the same way in this case. You paint it silver first, then you paint a transparent red over it, and then you paint it with gloss. And what it does is it gives it a gem-like look without having to print in clear. It's one of those techniques that I've never seen anyone else do. I'm not saying they haven't, but I've never seen it. It's one of my absolute favorite techniques. And I've actually since modified it slightly to make it a little bit easier and more consistent. Now, I want you guys to know about my website where I have over 600 models now to choose from, and you can go there and you can pick out the same kit right there. You can see Skeletor. You can pick out the kit you want. If you want to paint this for yourself, you can pick out a model that you want me to paint for you. I also have paints and paint brushes, paint supplies, anything and everything you can think of, including those new Ionics are up for pre-order right now, which will be out here very soon. And use the code STORMYT2024 for a nice discount over on my website. Check it out today. I also have my portfolio there where you can see all of my works to date. It gets updated every single build, so you have plenty of references to see my work. Now, we're going to continue on with Skeletor, and we have still more to paint. And I know this is like the longest video I've done in a while, and it's because this ZEZ Studios gave us such a unique and incredible piece to paint. And I should note, if I haven't already, this is in 1/5 scale, because I had my client reach out to me and say I needed it in 1/5 scale, which was odd to me, but that's what he collects. And this turned out really nice, and it sits just short of 2 foot tall, so it's a really nice tall piece. But what I'm painting here is his staff. Now forgive me, I don't know everything about Skeletor, but it's like a staff with a goat head on it. And that goat head has like glowing eyes, so we're gonna be painting that here in a minute. But first, I wanted to do the bony parts and like the horns on the goat head. And you can see what I'm doing even for Skeletor's. I'm just dry brushing. Now my dry brushing didn't turn out as well as I wanted it to on Skeletor. I was hoping for a little bit more contrast, but I got a little heavy-handed. But it is what it is, and it's going to turn out just fine. I painted the eye sockets back in black, and then I actually masked off everything and painted everything purple, like his hood, and inside and outside purple. and that turned out well. The masking held for me, so I was happy. Now, I want to make that bone look, so I'm using some different Citadel paints here, like Skeleton Horde, and some different flesh tones to kind of add in some shadows and shades and colors to this bony stuff. And you can see how that turns out with the horns. It's just a really nice color, and this is, I'm pretty sure this is all the Skeleton Horde stuff that I'm using. And I'm doing the same thing on Skeletor, and you can see how that turns out. It really does look like an aged bone, which I really, really like. Then what I did, just to add a little bit of contrast to it, is I took like a flesh tone, and I just made a few highlights from overhead to try to add a little bit to it. It got a little too much of a highlight. I ended up toning it down a little bit with some more of the shade, but you can still see there's some highlight there. I painted the eyes themselves white first, and then I used that same red that we used on the gem of his chest. I think it's like Flesh Terror's red from Citadel. I used that in his eye sockets, and it turned out really well. So after getting the skull painted here, which you can see I just kind of did white, and then the bones for the horns, I sprayed the white and then fluorescent greens, same thing as what we did on the base, over his eyes to make it glow. And then you can see we have them all put together. Now, we still have one more piece to go, though, which is his cape. And one thing to note on this model is that staff is like inside his hand, so that made it a little bit tricky. It was one odd thing I had to deal with that I haven't before. So I actually had to keep the hand separate and the staff. It was like one piece. But anyway, moving on to the cape. I am going through this cape and I'm highlighting it with grays. That's what I did first. So there's like 3 layers of grays of highlights over top of the black. And that is to create contrast, essentially, for the purple contrast paint. And I'm using the same Luxion purple here, which is such a beautiful, bright purple. I actually compared it in the Ionic video, and it was the same like level of pigmentation as the purple. No, I don't think I did in the video, but I did it after the video, I guess I should say, and it looked beautiful. I absolutely love the pigmentation of this color. It's such a bright, beautiful purple, and with that, we can actually put our cape on, and we have a nice, beautiful, beautiful Skeletor to take a look at. If you like what you saw today, please like this video, consider subscribing to see more content. Don't forget to go over to my website and check it out at relentlessstormmodels.com, and also check out my Patreon, because I just started that new tier for entrepreneurs so they can learn how to turn this hobby into a nice little side gig and earn some cash. Hope to see you back here real soon.